Hello and welcome back to the Holy Unapologetic podcast. My name is Marcus and I'm joined by Ace. How are you doing today, Ace?
So good. Getting ready for the holiday season here.
Nice. Love to hear
Yeah.
it. All right, so we are going to keep this one pretty relaxed today. We don't have any guests. We have a great lineup of guests coming up in January. So today we're just going to be chatting, but we have a few things we wanted to talk about. I wanted to jump in on the topic of self-care, which is a very popular topic these days, and it's one that I struggle with quite a bit. Um, but we're talking about all these different related things, but with this idea of like deny yourself and follow me came up in our prior podcast. So nowadays, there's such a focus on self care that it can kind of just be a new prescription of like all the things you have to be doing, whether it's the cold plunge. Like I bought the sauna, I'm getting to the gym, staying hydrated. That's all good stuff. But I realized for me and my version of wanting to do self care to avoid burnout, I was just giving myself 1,000 new things on the to do list to focus on. And it still wasn't the same thing as like relaxing into my body. It was just another thing I had to get done. So I'd love to hear more about how you've come to a healthy, connection with your body and listening to what it needs. Because I think one of the best things I've found personally is going for massages every once in a while. It's a time where I literally cannot be on my phone and someone is actually like physically taking care of me. But when I first started, I still would just be like laying there running through my to-do list of the next things I had to get done. And there's such a focus in our culture of like how to be more productive than 99% of other people and how to get your side hustle going. Like there's such a crazy focus on output and productivity and even for creativity, how to monetize everything. And it can be exhausting. Like I don't really know how to stop. It's like I know how to keep going and I feel like it's easier to stay in high gear than to and then just like try to fall asleep quickly to then just keep doing it again. And I think that's what I realized too with self-care was I was really only doing it so that I could be more productive tomorrow instead of genuinely stopping, relaxing, listening to my body, letting my brain take a little bit of a break. I was talking to my life coach about this because I realized, like, even in times when I've relapsed, like, kind of all I'm doing is just like, I just want to sit and watch YouTube. Like, I just want to chill on the couch and rewatch the same videos that have made me laugh a million times. And my coach was like, yeah, well, like, you know how those videos are going to end. Like, it's not just another webinar or another course. Like, your brain can relax because it's something familiar. But for me, most of the time, I would never just even just rewatch a comfort movie because I'm like, okay, well, there's this class that I've been really wanting to take online or this educational thing. Like, I am always going, going, going. I get like such a good high off of the productivity. I don't know how to slow down. And like in the same way that at the gym, I would know like, oh, I'm actually straining a muscle. I'm going to stop doing more reps. Or, if you're doing a long road trip, you pull over, you stretch your legs, or you stop for a hotel at the end of a long night. Like I would never drive to the point of unsafety when it comes to that type of thing. But in my own life and my own productivity, I don't pull off to the side of the road to stretch my legs. I just keep going until that burnout point. So I would love to know more about how you've kind of come into your kind of healthy relationship with connecting to your body, knowing, like we were talking about the other day, like, I'm going to take it a little slow today and I'm going to change around my schedule because this is what I need. Then added on top of that, how to do that as someone who was raised with an idea of deny yourself and uh, focus on the other things, how to really be a friend to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. The self-compassion piece is huge. And it's something
Mm.
that I realized very early on I was horrible at. Because I had this drive, this internal drive that was given to me, I think naturally, but also Christianity really pushed it and ingrained it into me. I'm like, you have to be perfect. You can't mess things up. You can't make a mistake. You have to, strive for excellence, all these different things. And I remember the day that I had like a breaking point, and I was actually in the parking lot of like a local grocery store, and I was watching people walk by, and they were all disassociated from their bodies, and they were just going from the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. They were just getting tasks done, doing the things that they needed to do. But as you looked at their faces, like no one was happy. And what I realized is in my own life, I had gotten to a point where I had pushed so hard that I had become numb to everything else that was around. And I was very unaware of the fact that there could be joy and happiness and smiling and laughter and pleasure in my body. And what had happened was I had been so deeply hurt from people in my community and from society that I just began to shut down. And it was actually a survival instinct. And I think most of us go through this at some point. And what happened was I abandoned myself so that I could fit into society and be seen as normal. And I don't even know what normal is. Normal is a construct that I I still can't wrap my head around because nobody's fucking normal. We're all weird in our own ways, right?
Mhm.
But what happened was I abandoned myself because I felt rejected and I was depressed and I was lonely and I was scared and I was anxious and I was threatened and I was frustrated and I was avoiding all of these things. And what happened was I just became really withdrawn and I felt worthless and devastated and powerless and empty. And I think a lot of us in society are walking around with those emotions flowing in us, and we're not even aware of it. It's almost the way that we just do our life. And so when I came across the erotic blueprints, my world totally shifted because one of their very first things was pleasure first and how to actually slow down, regulate your nervous system. Basically, the idea is that you're trying to find pleasure in your body. And so I start every single morning, instead of getting on my phone and hopping on Facebook or checking the news or just even getting out of bed and starting my day, I slow down and I think, okay, what would bring me pleasure right here in this moment? And it starts out in my mind of like, okay, what might I like? But then I really sink into my body and get aware of the sensations that are naturally arising in that moment. And so some mornings, something that could be pleasure first for me could be just grabbing a piece of chocolate off my nightstand, just because it tastes good and it would give me a little bit of joy as I start the morning. Some mornings it's doing meditation, or it's doing breath work, or maybe it's doing some light stretching or exercising. It's really learning to attune to what my body wants in the moment and giving myself that in that space. Because what I've realized is a lot of times we're walking around this world, we're not even aware of the sensations that are in our body or what our body may want in this moment. We are simply
Mhm.
bypassing it and going on to the next thing. But I think I talked about this in another podcast that I had done. The body doesn't lie. The mind is consistently giving us these lies, and we're thinking about things that may or may not be true. But if we can actually get into our bodies and start to feel the sensations that are genuinely present there, we can actually get to the root of what's going on. We can start uncovering what may be laying there dormant that we're not even aware of. And so I've been doing this practice for 3 years now. Every single morning, the very first thing I do is pleasure first. I think, what could bring pleasure to my body? And it's actually changed the way that I engage in the world and how I show up when I walk out the door. Because I'm incredibly present with myself. So I'm not disassociated, but I know what's going on and I'm aware of it. And then I'm able to, walk around this world from a very centered and grounded space and not from a place that's just kind of disassociated in my mind, but it's a really centered in who I am and how I want to, go out and express myself in this world.
Mm, I love that. I love that. Yeah, you talked about this idea of which maybe emotions that we don't want to feel or not, or kind of ignoring and numbing and things like that. I think one version of that that I struggle with is when, like for example, like if I've had to set a boundary, a hard boundary with someone, that's really hard for me to do. It's really heartbreaking. I would love for those things to be resolved, but by removing that boundary, there's only been more pain and more suffering and abuse in that situation. I know that it's healthier to have that boundary up, but that's something that is this kind of unresolved thing. And so in this kind of stoic sense of like, what can I change, what can I not, I know that I can't change anything about that situation, so then I just don't want to feel the negative feelings associated with it anymore. I think I often kind of will go down the line of like, okay, is there something I can do about this? If not, I don't want to feel it. So it could be a productive compartmentalization tactic, but it also kind of invalidates the fact that I should be allowed to feel some sadness or loss or devastation around something, So I think even then I kind of treat my emotions about as to whether or not they can be productive. And if not, I don't want to feel them at all. Or something like, even when I first started off on this process and kind of my shame journey, I kind of felt like, oh, shame explains kind of everything in my life. Great. I should be now able to put that on the shelf and move on. Like I thought, like I just had always felt like I was just drowning in this shame. And so I started
Mm,
researching it and going on this very exciting journey of unlocking just why so many of my things in my life are interconnected because of this thing. I kind of felt like the feeling should go away because I've processed it in my mind, or I've justified it in my mind. And
mm,
that's not the case. So that sounds to me a lot more like, you can kind of work through it in your brain, but that doesn't mean your body's healed. And especially for something that's affected you for decades, how do we kind of start that healing process in our
yeah.
bodies to let you know, like, I know I'm safe up here, but maybe my body doesn't yet.
Mm, wow. This is incredibly deep, and we could probably do 7 podcasts on this or more.
Yeah,
The
no pressure.
reality, yeah, right? The reality for me was I needed to take ownership of what I could do for myself and
Mm,
living the life that I desire to live. So understanding my wants, needs, and desires, and aligning my life in such a way that I was doing what I needed to do for myself. Because I think I lived so much of my life in service to other people that I totally abandoned any desire that I had so that I could make other people happy and I could please other people, or I could serve them in like the Christian mentality, right? So it's for
hmm
Jesus, so it's all
hmm
good. Um, but really learning how to love myself first and like just authentically show up for what was arising, and then being able to hold space for that. One of the best things I did was hired a therapist and a somatic sexologist who allowed me to be present with whatever was arising in the moment. And they were professionally able to hold space so that I didn't feel like I was going to lose myself in this journey. But really,
mm,
I could get deep with those desires and really authentically feel them and like have a presence with them that was incredibly loving. And so I could go into some of the deepest, darkest spaces in my life with someone else present in the room, knowing that I wasn't going to go so deep that I couldn't get out, that I
yeah.
had support, that I had genuine care, that I had professional people who could walk me through it so that I was no longer avoiding these feelings and desires, but I was meeting them with loving presence and really diving into whatever was there in the moment. That was huge for my journey. I remember
Mm,
one of the very first times I was with somebody who was doing some energy work with me, and I had some really dark like thoughts and emotions going on. And I was afraid to go there because I was like, if I go there, I may never come back. I might have like a break, a mental break. And to be able to have people alongside of me that could hold me in that space with loving awareness and kindness and compassion and empathy was a total game changer, because when you can experience all of the emotions and the depth of each emotion, that is actually the human experience. And if you're not able to dive into some of those things, you're really missing out on the full experience of life. I think a
hmm
lot of times we think, some of these emotions are bad and we don't want to deal with them. We don't want to actually dive into them because we don't know what's going to be there. Taking that mentality out of my psyche and saying, this isn't a bad emotion, it's just a different emotion that might be uncomfortable. And there might be a pain edge here for me to grow into, was a huge realization of like, okay, if I have a professional sitting with me in this room that I know can pull me back and that can hold me and to love me and ground me and center me, I can go into the depths of my soul and actually do the work. So I'm no longer avoiding what's there. And so I walk around this world right now without this like hollow, dark hole that I had for so long,
right.
because I learned how to become present with some of those darker energies that are just simply a part of the natural human experience that none of us want to go into, but they're there as a human. They exist. Like, for us to totally set them aside and not deal with them is putting aside a major part of who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, I lived with my brother for a number of years, and I'm really grateful for that because we were able to talk through a lot of our childhood in kind of a safe space and
Hmm.
talk about the things that went well and things that didn't go so well. And that was really helpful to have someone to talk to and have those emotions validated because I feel like I was able to process the things that hurt or things that, would had lasting damaging effects. But then just having that emotion validated meant that I could then move on from them and be like, I wish it was different, or I wish they hadn't done that without needing like, well, I need to track this person down and they need to apologize. I really felt like I was able to just let it go at that point. Because I think some people, like you said, that you just are kind of used to holding that and hiding that away, or just like, well, let it go, it was so long ago. And I think it was kind of the opposite for me, was just having a safe space to talk through something, because it's very formative what happens to you when you're young. So being able to talk through that in a safe space can be so wonderful. So for me, I had that with my brother for a number of years, and then I'm grateful for therapists and all these others. And I know that when I'm really being hard on myself, as I feel like I always am, I think sometimes even my life coach will remind me, like, you're being a friend to yourself because you paid for coaching, and I've also got a fitness coach, and you're surrounding yourself with people that can help you, is a big one, to be like, oh yeah, I am, if I may just think all these kind of hard thoughts all the time, but I still am acting in a way that can be a friend to myself, which is good. I do want to circle back on what you were talking about in terms of just how Christian it is to kind of take care of everyone else first. And I feel like that is absolutely the version of Christianity that I saw from my parents. My mom was like the perfect example of the housewife mother that literally, like, would not sit down until everyone had everything else they could possibly need. And then with my dad too, being a pastor, I feel like he had to be everyone's therapist. And one week he could be doing a funeral unexpectedly, and the next week he could be doing a wedding unexpected. Like, it just kind of, it's understandable that it sometimes felt like he'd be coming back home with a pretty empty tank because you're taking care of everyone else. And I certainly feel like, as a pastor's kid, that was something that I do kind of resent about the experience, was always feeling like I had to be on and performing and to be kind of the dancing monkey for whatever I needed to be. There are ways that I was made to feel uncomfortable around other adults that I wish I wasn't, just because, every other adult in the room has to be entertained and comfortable before anything else. It's rarely, time back around to deny yourself. That's why I think for me and my introversion, it's taken me a long time to like put myself out there in other social situations. Like, I remember, like, even for my therapist and my life coach, when I came out to LA, I was like, oh, you should go to find writers clubs or find other screenwriters and go to a gathering. And I suddenly realized why I was dragging my feet so much. And it was because I was thinking, like, I would go there and I would need to make sure that everyone else feels completely validated, completely comfortable, because they're putting themselves out there with their writing. They need to make sure they feel okay. I was thinking about everyone else in this hypothetical situation, and I was already exhausted, instead of thinking, like, well, maybe I'll go. Maybe I'll meet some nice people. Maybe they'll give me some feedback on my writing. There was nothing about my own experience I was thinking about. I was pre-exhausted by the idea that I was going to have to make sure everyone else is at 100 before I can even start to relax. And that is an exhausting level of self-denial. And so it could be really hard for me to then, to tie it all back around, go into some idea of self-care without thinking, well, this is just so that I can do more tomorrow, that type of thing, because I'm so
Mm,
used to deny thyself.
hmm. Yeah. I think the interesting thing that both of us probably realized through this journey of becoming transmasculine and being our authentic selves was we realized that we really wanted true intimacy with ourselves.
Mm.
We wanted to belong, we wanted to love, we wanted to be loved. And in that, we found unconditional love for ourselves. And that right there is the key missing piece that I think a lot of people are searching for in this world, but they haven't quite yet found, is how do I be intimate with myself in such a way that I put my needs and desires first so
Mhm.
that I can actually show up and love other people from a place of fullness and joy and like just authenticity. Um, yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's kind of what's spinning in
Yeah.
my mind right now.
I love that. And I mentioned this, I think, in one of our last episodes of just how when I came out for my sexuality, I just felt like I almost had this image in my mind of like a beautiful windmill with or like the water mill thing where the water's, it's just like I felt like I had this clean running water through me. So it's like I could
Mhm.
just love everyone and everything. And it wasn't, one thing that I hate so much is when homophobic people will say like, oh, it's just all about sex for them. That's all they're just crazy about sex. It's like, you guys are thinking about that. That's not what I was talking about here. Like, um, and so it's like it's so much more than that. But in any case, for me, and coming to terms with that part of myself, and just realizing how much of my life was exhaustingly worried about, like, I want to dress this way, but then what if they think I'm gay? And then like I have to
Yeah.
like be like, oh no, it's okay, I still like boys. So then it's like just so many extra running programs I was able to just close out of those windows. It's a beautiful thing. And then of course, now you layer on gender identity to it too. And I'm just so much happier. And it's, for someone that struggled a lot with depression in my life, struggled with like suicidal thoughts, like the idea that I'm in a part of my life now where I'm excited to think about where it could be 1 year into my transition, 5 years into my transition. I literally like we have all these Christmas events going on at the ship that I work at, and I was thinking like, oh my gosh, like if I can actually grow facial hair, like I could be a Santa someday. Like that's a lot of years in the future. That for someone that's been suicidal, the idea that I can be looking forward that far is such a beautiful thing. And it's just like
Yeah.
anyone that knows me and has any care for me should just only be happy that I'm excited about being alive, and again, it's not just some current topical like thing, this whole trans thing. But yeah, but that self-love, that self-compassion, intimacy with ourselves, that's what you said, unconditional.
Yeah.
That's a big one. That's not one I have often felt, but one that I feel more in my life now. And I'm so grateful for my closest relationships now because I feel like people know me for all of me. Um,
Mhm.
and that's incredibly powerful because I think so much of trying to be the perfect pastor's family is like making sure to show and highlight this thing and hide away this thing and tuck that under whatever, push that away in
Yeah.
the closet. And so now that I'm in this part of my life where I've had relationships with people for either long amount of time or just with a depth of them seeing me when I'm really struggling and also when I'm totally thriving, and that I would so much rather that than what I'm used to for so much of my life of the kind of relationships where like, okay, I'm keeping this one up pretty low because they've just seen this part of it and they didn't find out that I was struggling over here. Like, no, that's not what I want anymore. I got higher standards now. I want people to know all of me. And if they still choose to stick around, then that is a beautiful thing. And we can just all love each other so much better because it's real.
Yeah.
And that's another thing too, with those types of friendships and with those types of relationships, even with my girlfriend, we kind of started pretty soon after I was really struggling coming off of a relapse. And she was just so willing to come and help me during like the most kind of embarrassing parts of it. And it was really hard for me to say yes when she offered to come over and help just spend time with me. And I'm like, got cold sweats and shaking and headaches and can barely think straight. It was a massive leap forward for my Christian background to be like, yes, come over, like, yeah, because I just think of this phrase like never let them see you bleed. That's so much of what I would
Mm.
have, keep up that perfect pastor's family thing, to actually be like, yes, come over. And then she brought me like drinks to help get my electrolytes back. We just ended up watching all these like childhood movies that we loved, and she took such good care of me at a time when I'm at my most like self-loathing, most hard on myself. But I was so excited because I was like, oh my gosh, like I can actually ask for help. I can accept help when I'm struggling. Because I would be the first person to want to give that to somebody else, but always to
Mhm.
deny myself, to never, let them see you bleed. And so that was this massive leap forward in my life to just say, yes, you can come over. My apartment's a mess right now. Like it was so hard for me to say yes to someone that was just ready to be there to love me. And so, yeah, these things are so kind of in opposition to each other. To really
Mhm.
let yourself be taken care of by someone is such a beautiful thing. And of course, that's what I want to give to other people. But to then be arrogant enough to be like, but I never need it. I can do it all by myself, and I don't need any help. It was a really big leap forward. But I want to get better at that self compassion and that self care, and not just so that I can be more productive later. Um, to really be a friend to myself. And I was kind of thinking too of just like, yeah, sometimes it's fun to like go with your friends to Target, but what friend would I be if I only recommended that we go to Target, or I need to get my car washed, or we need to go to the bank? Like I'd be a terrible friend. Like sometimes you want to go to the movies or go out to dinner, but if it's just, I can do that if I'm doing it with someone else. But if it was just for me, like, no, 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 I can do something better with my time. It's more productive. I'm still really hard on myself. So I think, anyway, that's just part of my own story and a moment of breakthrough of actually saying yes to help when you need it. And then it can lead to the fact that I have so many deeper, richer relationships in my life now because they know all of me and I'm not hiding away when I struggle and I'm trying to be more open and honest about it. Because not only does that help me heal faster, but if that helps anyone else, or if
Mhm.
anyone else can reach out to me when they're struggling, I would so be wanting to help out in any way that I could. So, but it's very, very different from the
Mhm.
upbringing and the perfectionism and the black and white thinking and is something sinful or is it not sinful, but just being and trying to take care of
Yeah.
yourself and others. There's a lot of growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you hit on a key point, and that is when someone decides to transition or they're transgender and they actually realize it and they want to present themselves in that sort of way in society. I think there's this moment where things shift and we go, fuck societal norms, fuck religion, fuck whatever our family says we need to do because this is the way we've always done it. Like, we turn things upside down and we view life from a totally different perspective.
Mhm.
And like you were saying, some of the best relationships that I have are with people that can come into my life when everything's a mess and I am hurting and they can literally just show up and be present. That is not the way that our society functions. Our society functions in such a way that we're just going to go about our day, pretend that nothing happened, and we're going to have a smile on our face and be professional and whatever that might look like. That does a disservice to everybody. And the amount of hurt and pain that's sitting there, we're all just wallowing in it instead of actually being able to be present with what's going on, allow those emotions to flow through our bodies, and just experience the full humanity that we get to have.
Yeah. So great. It really is. It's so amazing being trans and just kind of being able to have this fresh start of like, well, who do I want to be? And like everything is up for grabs. And also, like again, if you're spent so much life just in survival mode to now just being like, oh, I want to thrive. It's just such a beautiful, eye-opening thing. And I think I can understand why people will, there's sometimes this question to trans people of like, well, if you could, would you go back and be born cisgender? And a lot of people say like, no. If my body could be different with a snap, then maybe, yeah. But like in terms of actually having this massive experience, and I think I'm just so excited too in terms of seeing the world from many different sides and being, a side female at birth is a very different upbringing, and to now see the world in different ways. And for me as a writer, it's very exciting too. It's an empathetic exercise, but yeah, we have a different level of wanting to just authenticity. And I think I saw this great video from another podcast that I like. They were talking about like that's why queer people can often just like go into queer spaces and automatically feel safe because we know what we've had to go through to get to where we are now, that we're just ready to kind of love and be loved and take care of each other because of what we've had to push through to get to this
Yeah.
point. One thing I was thinking the other day, I was watching a show that was talking about how a lot of the young men get bullied in this town, the young queer boys, and part of me felt like guilty for a moment because I feel like I had a lot of like straight and cis passing privilege growing up. I'm bisexual
Mhm.
myself, so I was always able to kind of hide behind the fact that I did still like boys. I had great relationships with men and could talk about how cute they are. Like I could always like perform that heterosexuality genuinely, and then I would just be able to say like, no, there's no way I like girls because I like boys. So like, okay, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And then with in terms of gender identity, women are allowed a lot more androgyny than men are. Like young boys
Mhm.
being effeminate is you're infinitely more likely to be ridiculed than a girl that likes to dress up in boyish clothes. So in both of those ways, I almost feel guilty for the ways that I was protected. Like I wasn't bullied growing up. Um, and that type of thing. But at the same time, I also feel like my own self realization was very much delayed. I think that if I were a lesbian, I would have like known a lot sooner. And that would have been agonizing and infinitely, in other ways, but I also would have known a lot sooner. Like I pretty much came out to myself at 25 for my sexuality. And then I think 27 for my gender identity. And then like put that away and then came out of my gender identity at 29. Um, and so, all these will happen at their own time. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, because I feel like I feel kind of guilty because I have so much other privilege, I'm being, for my faith that I was raised with, for being white, for being, I never, socioeconomically, I never had to wonder where my next meal was coming from. But I think with being bisexual and with that, just that fact of androgyny being okay, my sexuality, my gender identity, even though looking back, I knew when I was 5 years old, I think I was very much protected from what we think of as this traditional queer experience of it being really terrible. But I also think that kind of delayed me coming to find myself because of that, that, what is it, headcon, like the heteronormative conditioning. I was able to hide from myself for longer because of that. So I'm curious about your thoughts on those topics.
Yeah, I had a very similar journey. I mean, I didn't come out till I was 38, so I mean, it took me even longer to figure that out. The reality is, yes, I feel a lot of privilege in the fact of how I grew up, being a white conservative Republican, having money. Um, Even through the medical transition, um, I have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, but I'm able to take care of it because of the privilege that I've had and the fact that I sold my house and I could pay off some of my debts and things like that. So to feel like I didn't struggle like some other people do, like there are people that have been homeless since the age of 12 because they came out to their
Mm,
parents and just went
right.
sideways from there. Um, so there's definitely a lot of empathy that I have for people that have a totally different journey and experience and hardship. I even think about like trans feminine people and how their journey sometimes can be so much harder because it's hard if they want to pass for them to pass, because they
Mhm.
might not have had hormone blockers growing up, and there are just some physical characteristics of masculinity that naturally come out, and it's hard to reverse those at a certain time. And so there is a piece of me that really does recognize some of the privilege that I do have, even just being a trans masculine person in the society today. What my mind goes to, though, is society's inability to hold space for people who are struggling in any capacity. I think there's people all
Mm,
along the spectrum. Everybody in some sort of way is struggling. We just don't know it. And so that actually does influence the way that I show up and meet people in the world today because I don't know their story. And so a huge piece of what I've tried to do is create a space where I am intentionally listening for the other person's story when I meet someone,
mm,
and not necessarily making assumptions or stereotyping them in a certain category, but really leaning in to find out what the story is of the person that's across the table. Because I think as a society, if we were actually actively engaging in conversation with the people that we meet, things would be so different
mhm,
because we'd be able to see the humanness in that person's journey and the fact that we all have struggled to some degree or another, and we can relate to each other and meet each other in those spaces. So, yes, people absolutely, some people have horrific life stories, and they've come to a space in their life where you might not know their history or their past. But if we're able to hold conversations and simply listen to someone and hear a different perspective of how they were raised or what type of demographics they grew up in, what kind of situations did they face, I think we'd have a lot more compassion towards people as we walk around this world and knowing that this human journey is fucking hard for
mhm,
anybody that's in this world. And yes, there are people that absolutely have privileges that some people are never going to have. And that sucks. 100%. But how do we meet each other in these spaces where I have something to give you and I have the ability to do so because I know your story now and I can help you in that space? Like, it kind of comes back to that whole idea that you were mentioning earlier on. outcasts, like of not being showing up in this world and being perfect.
Hmm.
But how can we really show up in this world and be authentic with what's going in and going on, and how can we help each other through this journey? Because we're not meant to do this journey.
Yeah,
We've been
absolutely.
created to be in community, and that's one of the biggest downfalls I think right now that we have in society is that we've all individualized and we've learned how to do this alone. We're not finding community where we can belong and show up as we are, who we are, and share resources with each other and share empathy with each
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something I really appreciate about my current relationship is like with my girlfriend is that we love each other so much, but I think we're also pretty quick to know when we've been triggered by something and to even just pause and then I'll like this just even happened the other night where I was like, oh, I realized why that phrasing really bothered me is because of something that happened, when I was a kid and we were able to just kind
other.
of talk through it and empathize with each other and not be like, so yeah, another silly thing from when your childhood, there's that compassion there and it's huge to just be open about it. But yeah, so I want to kind of touch on a couple of things you had mentioned. Yeah, we all, our transitions are our own stories and our own pace. There are multiple guys that I know now that have been transitioned before they're 20, which sounds crazy to me. And
Yeah.
it's like, so I'm grateful for my own journey, but I'd also love to kind of ask them about their experience. That's be someone we could have on the show and how much that is different in this kind of social media world. And I'm certainly grateful for all sorts of trans mask guys on social media to be inspired by and hear their stories. But I also think it'd be really incredible to speak to a trans feminine individual because I do think their experience is vastly different from ours. I mean, for me, I'm going to be transitioning to basically be in a straight looking relationship as a white male. Like I'm going to be at
Hmm.
the basically the top of the totem pole, that's going to be very strange. It's very different. And I think this would be helpful for people to understand is that the transgender experience is not separate from misogyny and the patriarchy. And so the trans feminine experience, I feel like, is probably so, so, so much harder than ours. And so much of the transphobia in the media is hateful towards and fixated on trans feminine individuals. We kind of never get talked about. So
Yeah.
there's kind of this classic thing of like, oh, I don't want any trans women in my bathroom. It's like, okay, so then you want like me and the other trans guys, like especially ones with facial hair. Hopefully, I'll get there soon. But like, you want them in the bathroom with the women. Like it's like they don't even think trans men exist. Like that's which I think in and of itself is tied to that misogyny. But the way that trans women are treated, like they're the threat, they're the villain, when statistics couldn't be more opposite of that, is really heartbreaking. So I would love to have someone else speak to their experience. Not that I hope that it's that negative, but that I don't feel like I should be the one to speak for their experience. Only just acknowledge that the trans masculine and trans feminine experience are very different, I would imagine. Um, but yeah, I think that ability to know, or just knowing that we don't know what someone else has been through is so important. I know for myself, I've been a victim of assault on multiple occasions. And I was literally thinking the other night of how, oh, I'm so grateful it didn't happen when I was in college. I was happening when I was an adult. I could go to Planned Parenthood and get tested after I could get birth control. I could, drive to where I need to go. And I also am not religious anymore. Like if that had happened to me in college, as it happens to so many young women, I would have been not only as devastated as I was, but add on top that religious shame of that happening to me, which is in and of itself such a crazy thought. But I was basically thinking, like the other night, about my privilege around my own experience with my own uh, terrible trauma. And I mean, I guess that's just a way that I'm trying to compartmentalize and process it. But it has been interesting in ways that there are people, in family and other people in my life that didn't really want me to talk about it, or they felt like I was, I guess, trauma dumping. But for me, it's been a big deal to feel like I don't need to keep those men's secrets anymore. I don't need to hold that alone. I don't need to, because there is so much shame and there are infinite reasons why people don't report, and that goes into so many other topics. But I just think even for myself, it's been healing to be able to talk to other people and not feel like it's my secret to bear, and like I said, keep the secrets for them. But then I still feel like it has been, maybe there is a helpful side of it too, to process the ways that I guess other people have it worse, or ways that I was grateful that I was able to take care of myself after the fact in ways that I needed to. Um, or even just to survivalistically compartmentalize it in the ways that I need to. But yeah, you never know what anyone else is going through or has gone through. But I do feel like, to kind of tie it back, a lot of times in queer spaces, I feel like when I meet other queer people, like, we get into these conversations right away. Like, we are so comfortable with each other that we then just start at a deeper level. There's not like putting up a fake front. There's not as much need for small talk. We kind of are just, it's like, it kind of sometimes feel like soul to soul. I mean, do you find that with other people in the community, that you just connect faster and more deeply?
Yeah, yeah. There's a depth there because there's been an understanding and an experience in their life that they can pull from, and they can gain some empathy out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely found that. I think there's also this like almost childlike joy too for a lot of queer people, because we kind of were had to be like little adults when we were kids to just
Mm-hmm.
survive. That now that we're adults, we're just okay with having fun and like doing crafts and playing video games. Like, there's this, I feel like there's this kind of childlike, like, this makes me happy and I'm gonna do it, because I was so pent up and stressed out when I was younger. Like, now that I'm just able to live my life, I think there's also like a youthful quality to a lot of people in the queer community that are just looking to have fun and have a good time, because we had to be very serious when other people were able to just kind of be more free.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that as I was transitioning. The fact that like I lived my life for the first 30 years of my life very serious, very professionally driven. I didn't want to fuck things up. Then I came out and I was like, well, I got nothing to lose. Like, let's have some
Yeah.
fun. Let's play.
Yeah, and again, leaving behind that idea that we have to be perfect and sin-free and blameless, and just and I said this, I believe, one of our other shows too, but how helpful that was to hear in coaching with you, that idea of like, you're gonna fuck it up. Like, go have fun, go try things. And that was huge and terrifying for me to hear, because I want to plan everything out and be as prepared as possible. And this was a really big breakthrough for my own journey, because I think of myself kind of as a writer first creatively. That's where I've really found my home and like the biggest soul connection. But I wanted to read every book, basically back here on my shelves, every book about writing, every book about screenwriting. I wanted to take every master class, every course. And then I wanted to do all of the research that could ever be done, and then do all the outlining. And it's like, the way you get better is you just sit down and you start writing. So
Yeah,
all of that structure is great, but it was kind of my way of delaying and procrastinating on it. And so the idea of just starting, and so I love the idea of like, you can edit a bad page, you can't edit a blank page. Although I
mm,
don't like the way that a lot of people talk about writing, where it's like, you're going to write something that sucks, and then you're going to write something that sucks a little less. It's very negative. But in any case, that idea of combating that perfectionism of thinking I can plan for everything and prepare for everything. And, I can be very type A in that way.
yeah,
The liberation that came from just like, just sit down and start writing. Then you're just going to like discover stuff, and then you'll discover other things because it just kind of happened. But the discipline to just stare at that scary blank page. And so
yeah,
the freedom to go out and make mistakes is then the beauty of what life can be in that way. But it was very antithetical to what, um, which
yeah,
is just kind of absurd to think that it, especially as Christians, when you have this external locus of control where God's ultimately still controlling everything, we still kind of feel like we want to control everything as much as possible. I don't really know what that is, because that kind of seems like an opposition of like, let go and let God. But at the same
well,
time,
I think there was always that fear of consequence. Like, oh, if I do this, then
mm,
something bad is going to happen. The reality is, like, if you can let go of good, bad, right, wrong, you can simply, like, learn to live in the flow of life and understand that things are going to ebb and flow. You're going to have some moments that feel really great. You're going to have some moments that don't feel so great. And, like, how do you embrace that instead of run from it? I think that is a key in kind of transforming some of the pain that we felt from our religious upbringing and changing our mindset of like, it's not black and white. There's gray, there's color.
yeah.
How do we really dive into the fullness of this human experience? And instead of living out of fear and ignorance and judgment and shame, how do we turn that and live from a space that's just really authentic with all of the different emotions and all of the different just places on the spectrum that we're going to end up as humans? There are going to be moments when life is going really great, and it may or may not be because of something that we've done. It may just be the
Hmm.
flow of life and the universe and what's going on. There's things out there that I don't fully understand, but when I could submit myself to the fact that like I'm not predestined for this, this is
Mm.
just the way that it is, things started to slowly shift in my mindset and then also in the way that I was interacting with other people and handling what was coming up in my life. I was no longer afraid of something bad in quotes going on. I was kind of expecting something was going to happen that I didn't love, that there was going to be a pain point in my life, but it was going to be an opportunity for growth
Hmm.
and diving into that space and allowing that to exist instead of pushing it aside is what's really starting to catapult me forward, not only in my career, but also just in my day to day life as a human.
Yeah, because I love that idea. Like, there's really not growth without discomfort,
Mhm.
which is a hard one. But I do
Yeah.
think something I can sometimes find frustrating, but I can also very much understand. It sort of sometimes feels like with Christians, they'd rather believe in like the devil they know than the devil they don't. There's this idea of like if you can kind of tell them a story about something that has very clear angels and demons, heroes and bad guys, and it's this fight for the soul of the nation, whatever it might be, they're so much more likely to latch onto that than like, well, it's actually in some ways probably worse than you think, but in a lot of ways a lot better than you think, and it's messy and it's imperfect and it's a lot of things are beautiful. Like there's so much of that black and white thinking that I just sometimes feel like there's members of my family and beyond that would rather believe something horrible just because it kind of fits with that whatever stories they're already ready for than the reality. They'd rather have that very clear villain, which is really frustrating and heartbreaking because I feel like they're missing out on a lot of beauty in life and also a lot of things that I think that their energies could be better targeted towards. So we talk about, and this, and I know I'm kind of staying very broad with this, but if it's like, okay, well, we have to ban all the drag shows because of that. It's like, okay, well, how many leaders of the church have been accused of abusing children? So it's like the ways
Mm.
that they can just kind of be like, ah, yes, all the Democrats are drinking the blood, and yet like, okay, well, how about you look at your own church? And so like I know I'm staying so like almost comically broad right now, but I just think that there are these kind of ruts that with that Christian mindset that can
Mhm.
make certain people like they latch on to certain stories that are almost like seem cartoonish in some ways, but it fits better with heroes and villains and black and white and good versus evil that they're so ready for than actually just kind of tearing open the situation and seeing all that's there. And that's so much of what I wanted to do with my own life is just like, let's just rip it all open, spill it all out, kind of like Descartes with the apple basket, and just look at everything for what it actually is. And so when I pick up something and say, okay, I'm actually really struggling with this, not everyone wants to look at it or wants me to acknowledge it. They probably want me to put it away. But instead I'm thinking like, no, I want to get this apple out because it's going to affect the rest of the apples here. It's been infinitely better for my journey to
Mm.
really look honestly instead of these are the stories that I like and they keep order in my life because ultimately life is chaotic and unpredictable and that's scary. And so it makes
Mhm.
sense how we kind of cling to something that's familiar. But I do think that there can be predictable and problematic patterns that align with Christianity that make us maybe stick to some fake news, as it were.
This is something that we could absolutely go into in depth in another podcast for sure.
Hmm.
Because I think that's where a lot of people are sitting. They abide by these rules that have been made up by either religion or society or whatever, because they're unable to sit with the uncomfortableness of humanity.
Hmm.
When you're actually able to start engaging in the uncomfortableness of humanity and get comfortable with the uncomfortable, that's when your life really starts to bloom and
It's
like
everything.
everything changes. It's
Yeah.
colorful. Life is colorful at that moment.
Yeah. So beautiful. So I feel like this has been really great to just kind of tease a lot of the different topics we might want to talk about in other episodes, and also kind of give us some things to latch onto for other people we might want to loop in um,
Yeah.
and talk to about these types of things. So, is there anything else you want to talk about today, or any ways that you'd like to kind of wrap up here? Then we can just kind of start making notes for the future.
Hmm. Did I miss anything?
Well, like you said, we could go in infinite directions from here. So I figured this could probably be a good point to start wrapping up and
Yeah,
then just get
yeah.
excited.
Now, I just think there's a ton of depth here. Like, we've just scratched the surface of some
Hmm.
conversations that you and I have had that we've gone incredibly deep in. But it gives our listeners an opportunity just to see just a little bit about what it's like to be a trans man in this world and to escape religion and to escape the societal norms and to start to shift our worldview in such a way that we're able to see something much larger.
Hmm. Yeah, when I first reached out to Ace and he was kind enough to just do a video call with me, a complete stranger. I literally brought up like a chart of the way that I thought of all these things were interconnected because we have gender and sexuality and the patriarchy and misogyny and like the AFAB experience and the, AMAB experience and all of these different things. So I think if there's anything I would want to communicate through this podcast is just how much these things are all tied together from your childhood to your religion, to your gender, to your sex, to your, sexuality and your experience as a human in this world. We are all connected, and that's beautiful. And life is hard, like we talked about. And so I think just kind of appreciating the ways that these things are all tied and tethered together, I think could be healing for some people as we start to kind of pull at some of the threads of it. So I'm excited. Lots to
I
talk
love
about.
it. It's going to be a
All
great
right.
journey.
Yeah. Well, you have a wonderful holiday, and I'll be talking to you soon. We got a lot of great guests coming up for January.
See you next year.
Bye.